It does feel a lot like a concession, and it felt like yesterday what Sunak was doing was effectively a concession as well. And I have to question the wisdom of it. Will that work as a strategy, or will people look at that and think it's weak? I mean, obviously, it is trying to motivate the Tory core voters, to come out and prevent a Labour supermajority, but it's doing it from a position of weakness. It's almost pleading with the electorate to come out, with traditional Tory voters to come out and back us, because the prospect of what could come otherwise is much worse. And I'm not sure how that's going to play out. I've never seen it in an election campaign before.
Political editor Steve Swinford is with us, our great guide to what's going on in Westminster. Morning, Steve.
Good morning.
We've had a lot of people, even in the last couple of weeks. Look, we know the polls are bad for the Tories. We know they're staring down the barrel. But we had Gillian Keegan on Times Radio Drive yesterday, and she was still making the arguments, being bullish about their chances. Were you struck by the tone and tenor of what Grant Shapps was saying to us this morning?
Yeah, I really was. And I think that in the last 24 hours, you've seen a shift in the Tory message. So Rishi Sunak yesterday, when he unveiled the Tory manifesto, had this extraordinary line where he said a vote for reform, a vote for the Liberal Democrats is a vote for Labour and a vote for Starmer. That much is normal. But then he said it's a vote for Labour getting into power for a very long time. And then Grant Shapps this morning is warning against handing Labour a supermajority. And on social media, they're running adverts that are suggesting the Tory party could be reduced to 57 seats. So what they are doing is saying what until now has been what I would call the quiet bit out loud, that cabinet ministers have been saying for a while. This is about damage limitation. This is about reducing the size of Labour's majority. We're going to lose come what may, but the question is this a decade of Starmer, or is this 5 years of Starmer? Is this a massive thwonking supermajority or something smaller? And it's pretty extraordinary during an election campaign. I mean, it almost sounds like they're kind of admitting defeat when you listen to that Grant Shapps clip.
Well, that's what we were trying to say, and we don't want to overstate these things, but to me, listening to Asma have that conversation, that felt like an effective concession, because what else can it really be? Because they're really saying Keir Starmer's in, it's just how big. And that is kind of, that's probably true from the reading of the polls, but we had William Hague on yesterday. I keep coming back to this, but I was very strict. So I asked him, I said to William Hague, you've campaigned without hope before. How do you do it? And he says, the first thing you do is to tell yourself there's still a chance. You cannot let yourself think that you've been defeated. But that felt like a concession, didn't it, by Grant Shapps today?
It does feel a lot like a concession, and it felt like yesterday what Sunak was doing was effectively a concession as well. And I have to question the wisdom of it. Will that work as a strategy, or will people look at that and think it's weak? I mean, obviously, it is trying to motivate the Tory core voters, to come out and prevent a Labour supermajority, but it's doing it from a position of weakness. It's almost pleading with the electorate to come out, with traditional Tory voters to come out and back us, because the prospect of what could come otherwise is much worse. And I'm not sure how that's going to play out. I've never seen it in an election campaign before.
No, it's kind of taking the tactical voting argument that's traditionally made to get rid of a government and actually saying you need to tactically vote in order to preserve an opposition in the future.
Exactly. And look, what lies behind this, and what seems to have broken things in CCHQ and more broadly around people around Sunak, is obviously the D-Day gaff, which is now fading. We're on day 6 of that story. It's fading a bit, but it really devastated morale in CCHQ. Sunak was visibly, upset by the mistake and the error that he had made by not staying for longer. And I think in the wake of that, there has just been a shift in perspective and a shift in approach. And there is that kind of air of defeat now in a way that there wasn't before. And yes, I mean, if you're Labour looking at this, you'll be absolutely delighted. And then you've got GDP figures this morning showing the economy is not growing, when you had Sunak saying it's turning a corner yesterday.
The thing about politics is that there is a self-fulfilling prophecy about this, isn't there? 'Cause do you remember when, even with Liz Truss versus Sunak, once the narrative was Truss is going to win, that kind of became an inevitability. And then when actually the votes were counted, it was pretty close. It was much more close than previously considered. But the story had been clearly established. She's going to win, and therefore people felt like that was going to happen. It became inevitable. That's the risk the Tories are making here, that by talking like this, people will just say, yeah, it's going to happen. We're going to live with a massive Labour majority. And therefore it actually becomes more likely rather than less likely.
Yes, but that was partly, again, in the leadership contest, that was down to the polls, which showed very early on that Liz was the runaway favourite with Tory members, and therefore that became the narrative. Actually, it turned out to be much closer. here again, we're in a situation where the polls just keep coming and they keep showing this huge lead for Labour, and they keep showing Tory decimation. We'll get more MRPs later this week, probably, that are going to show MRPs are massive mega polls, and they're going to show again that life is not good for the Tories. And like you say, there is a risk that that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you don't have a stake in it, if you're a voter, a Tory voter, and you think, well, will my vote actually make a difference? They're going to lose anyway, then you might not turn out. So it's a very dangerous territory.
And what did you make of Starmer mentioning Corbyn? I thought it was an act of hubris, really, because he did support Corbyn. He did stand by him in that 2019 election. He did stand on a manifesto to be leader himself that was Corbynite in some respects. He's often accused of flip-flopping. He's often accused of having no principles. Mentioning Jeremy Corbyn unprompted seemed to raise all of those, but some people think it's just part of his strategy to push that left away, at least until the election is over. What did you make of it?
I totally agree with that. And if you talk to senior people around Starmer, they will make a simple point about Jeremy Corbyn for you. They will say that Keir Starmer literally killed Jeremy Corbyn. He cut him out the party, he cut ties with him in the most aggressive way possible, and no one can therefore confuse him with being a supporter or a sympathiser of Jeremy Corbyn. And they will say, by the same token, that is what Rishi Sunak failed to do. He never killed Liz Truss. He never buried her. He never publicly criticised her. So they would argue that Keir Starmer has earned the space to make that comparison. He can say this is like a Jeremy Corbyn manifesto because no one would mistake him for a Jeremy Corbyn sympathiser.
Interesting. I just find Labour manifesto tomorrow, I presume it's going to be de-risked entirely. If the Tories are sort of talking themselves out of any electoral possibilities, the whole purpose of this manifesto is just to get to the weekend.
It sounds like there are going to be very few, if any, surprises in it. And it's all about trying to show competence, trying to show the public that they can be trusted, particularly on the economy. So I would not expect any rabbits. I would not expect any great waves or anything like that. Possibly even of more interest tonight could be the big debate, the latest debate, which is going to have Starmer and Sunak doing one-to-ones up in Grimsby. So that may make more news. But the manifesto itself is going to be solid. It's going to be, we kind of know what's in it. And I don't think it's going to shift the dial, but nor is it intended to shift the dial.
No, the dial doesn't need to be shifted at the moment, people would say. Steve, great to speak to you as ever. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Steve Swinford there, Times' political editor, and you can hear the debate. It's kind of 2 interviews with each of the leaders and some audience interaction. So it's not going to be 45 seconds of gabbling whatever you think. There'll be a bit more to it. Whether that will help Starmer or Sunak, you can find out by listening to Times Radio this evening from 8 o'clock.